Hi, everybody. Welcome to Screen Less, Play More. I am Cynthia, the founder of screenlessplaymore.com. I'm so excited to have Amy Tyson with us today because there's so many things we can do at home to keep our kids away from dangerous screens, but then we send them to school. And a lot of schools are just filled with screens and games and all sorts of stuff. And Amy Tyson is a former child and adolescent therapist with 10 years of experience in the mental health field. She is the co-founder of everyschool.org and co-author of the first research-based educational technology model called the EdTech Triangle. So welcome, Amy.
Thanks for having me, Cynthia.
Could you just tell us a little about everyschool.org and what it is and why you wanted to start it?
Mm-hmm. We decided to found everyschool.org in 2019 after we started to see what was happening in our own local school district, and we were hoping to make some change locally, and started then to realize as we spoke to more and more parents and just friends across the country that many friends were having the same problems and seeing the same issues. Mm-hmm. And what we realized was there is quite a bit of research out there on the intersection of child development and education and social and emotional wellness. Mm-hmm. And that research was really kind of just cumbersome. So we spent the first year, 2018 to 2019, just reading everything we could get our hands on. And during that process, we realized we could probably kind of sum this up in an image, which is the EdTech Triangle, to simplify some of this data so that it's a little bit easier for administrators, schools, and teachers to implement healthy technology in the schools and eliminate the vast amounts of unhealthy technology in schools without having to do all that research themselves. Mm-hmm. We did it for them. They could follow the model and they could be on track. And along with that, we found that there was an issue with transparency in many school districts. Parents don't actually know what's going on. When I spoke to parents in my own district, many of them just thought, oh, that's probably fine. But no one really knew the details behind what was happening or what the model looked like or what to expect. So we felt like this was a nice way also just to have transparency between stakeholders. Mm-hmm. So everybody kind of knew what the expectation was, what the goals were, what the philosophy was.
It's really nice. I mean, the EdTech Triangle, people can go to everyschool.org and look at it. It's kind of like the food pyramid.
It is.
Sort of.
Yeah, that's how we describe it. It's a food pyramid.
It's really nice because it goes through these different levels of tech of like what's really beneficial to kids, what really needs a computer, and then what stuff is just superfluous and it's games and it's not actually helping kids. And so administrators could go through probably every single app, every single program they have and just put it against the triangle and say, is this really adding value to our school or should we just toss it out? And like you said, it's a really nice, easy tool to help schools and teachers and parents do that. So I'm really glad that you guys put that together. And then you had a Substack essay that was so interesting, and it said, educational technology is not the panacea we've been told it is. And you lay out a bunch of these myths about ed tech, which I thought were so interesting. And myth number one is that ed tech is on average making kids smarter. But why is this a myth? Why is it not true?
Well, it's not true because the data tells us it's not true. Both on a national level and an international level, the data that we have tells us resoundingly it is not making kids smarter. Our nation's report card since 2012 has been on the decline. And interestingly, in 2012 was the first year that we really had this massive influx of one-to-one devices into classrooms. And that's the turning point for two things. It's the turning point for our test scores going down, and it's also the turning point for our loneliness in schools rising from that point on. When you look at our international data, which was primarily from OECD and PISA, they both tell the same story. OECD found that tech in classrooms hasn't shown any appreciable improvements in reading, math, or science. And PISA found the same, other than they did find a small possible improvement for math scores. But what I find is really interesting with that is it is very quickly balanced out by the decrease in test scores when students are distracted by devices. Mm-hmm. So I think when your attention, and this is what probably a theme of our talk, is the more you attend to learning, then the more you will learn. So when you're not able to attend to the task, whatever small amount of benefits technology could bring is going to be taken away by the lack of attention to your learning process.
Okay, that makes
I
sense.
would also like to say that, the data is really inflated. So a lot of schools will look at industry funded data or app developer data because that's most of what we have. And
Okay.
that data is largely inflated. In fact, when you look at independent studies and compare those studies to industry funded studies, industry data shows inflated gains up to 70%.
Oh
So
my
you can't
gosh.
even really trust that data to be accurate.
So that's
Um,
like your school uses a certain app, and then the
mhm.
app is giving you, oh, here's all this data about how much our
Yeah,
app
yeah,
helps kids.
correct. Because they did the research themselves. Yes.
Okay.
And even when you look at, so sometimes like Pearson study, when Pearson hired an independent researcher, they looked at it and they found that their products didn't have an improvement. So then Pearson just did their own study to show that it does. So the app developers can find, like, there's always, there's some expression out there, I forget, but there's a study that can prove anything. And that's kind of true. And that's what we found when we first started researching this. There's a study to fund everything. And if you just Google, does EdTech work? All you're finding are the studies that show it does. You really have to kind of do a deep dive into those studies to say, like, but what does work mean? And like, what
Mm,
does what is the connection there with what's the consequence that might be happening, and who funded this? Because when you get down to the funders, it's always big tech when they're funding the
mhm.
studies that show that it's effective. But when you look at these large studies, the ones that we really care about, the national studies and the international data, that is profoundly saying that this is not working. In fact, I love this quote from the OECD. They said, students who use computers very frequently at school do a lot worse in most learning outcomes. I think that just says it all right there. It
Mhm.
just, in all learning outcomes.
Mhm. Well, and I think there's also a part, we can get into this too later, that their attention is so fragmented that even if they did start doing a little bit better on their math scores, but they can't pay attention long enough to read a book, that's not a win, you know? So the second myth is that the delivery doesn't matter. Like, oh, it could be a book, it could be a Kindle, it could be a tablet, it could be a game, it could be, but really, what is the big difference between the delivery method of having a computer screen versus something old fashioned? Let's take, for example, flashcards to do math and this game called Prodigy that is supposedly helping kids learn math.
Yeah, this is a line I hear a lot that, EdTech is a neutral learning tool. It's no different than a pencil. It's just a tool. The iPad is just a tool like Paint or, a protractor or anything else. But I think we know, honestly, like it doesn't take a rocket scientist to like look around and say, that doesn't feel like that's what's actually happening here. This device feels very different. And then we have the data to back that up. I mean, just going back to your first question, we can see from effectiveness that it is just not as effective as traditional methods.
Mm.
And also, we can't ignore like the compulsion loop that a device creates in us. It just continually pulls students towards screens for entertainment. And the
Mhm.
vast majority of time a child spends on a screen in life is done, it's being used recreationally. It's not being used for serious study. Which we see this because students are incredibly distracted. Even back in 2013, there's a study there done then, and they show that in about 6 minutes, a child is already distracted from doing online homework. If they're assigned digital homework, within 6 minutes, they're clicking something else that they shouldn't be
Mm.
clicking. The device itself is so profoundly distracting, and
Mhm.
that distraction creates inattention, and it makes us believe that we're multitasking. We're hopping between two different things, and the whole time we're really task switching, which reduces our accuracy and it reduces our ability to retain that information. Having the distraction and attention piece of the device is one of the main concerns. You
Okay.
mentioned the Prodigy versus flashcards, and we can talk about that a little more in detail. Prodigy is a big math app that a lot of schools utilize, but it takes a staggering 888 questions for a student to show a 1 point improvement on a standardized test. And that's not the only the problem. The bigger, maybe even the bigger problem is that the whole time they're being inundated with ads for paid memberships.
Yep.
So then parents have to decide, am I going to fork over the money for this paid membership? And then the kids who get the paid membership, they get more gear, they get faster leveling, more rewards. And I think we have to just look at that whole situation in reverse, like in a different light. So if it took a teacher, a living teacher, 888 questions to improve a test score 1 point, we'd probably be concerned. And on top of that, if that teacher was walking around the classroom and handing out rewards to the students who had paid to be in her class, that's a massive equity issue.
Yeah, I have a personal bone to pick with Prodigy. I didn't know anything about it. And my 7-year-old son came home from first grade and said, I need to get a membership. I'm like, what are you talking about?
It's happened to you.
Oh, I can level up more and I can get more pets and I can, he's going on and on and on. And I was like, what? Okay, well, if you want to spend your allowance on that, I guess. So I go on and it's like $9.99 a month. And I said, okay, you can be a member for 1 month. And he used his allowance to do it. And then what do you know? A couple days later, Mom, I need the ultimate membership or the premium membership. And we're walking out of school at pickup and he's sobbing. My pet isn't as good as Tommy's pet and blah. I mean, he's absolutely beside himself because he doesn't have whatever is the next level of the Prodigy thing. And so I Googled it and I found all this information about like what you're saying. It really doesn't help any of their math scores, and it's just a game, and they're constantly being asked if they will upgrade, and they get higher status. And so like you said, then these kids are left out if their parents aren't going to buy them a membership. They're just completely left in the dust. They're not going to higher levels. It's just a huge mess. And so I even went to our administrators and asked them about it. And they were like, oh, actually, that's not part of our curriculum. That's just for fun. Oh, you have a little bit of extra time in the day. Like, so they're thinking to themselves like, oh, it's better to give the kids Prodigy as like a fun reward because it's math. But really, it's just filling their brains with dopamine and getting them all hyped up and gamified. And they'd be better off saying, let's do 20 minutes of extra recess. So I really personally don't like Prodigy. And I canceled my membership. But that's how to get you. Because then I forgot. I totally forgot. So then I paid for 4 months of Prodigy because I never remembered to cancel it.
When your story is, it drives that point home beautifully. That is not a neutral learning tool right there.
No.
Like your kids, I'm guessing your son has never cried that he didn't have the same flashcards that his neighbor had or that he needed a different pencil. It's not. It's a completely different compulsion loop with a device.
If you don't mind talking about the problem with dopamine, I mean, dopamine is a chemical that your brain makes that acts on areas of the brain that give you feelings of pleasure, satisfaction, motivation. And so when this EdTech is gamified, Prodigy almost kind of looks like Zelda or something. There's all these characters and they're on these quests and there's swords and there's this and there's that. And so when stuff like this is gamified, what is problematic about this dopamine that kids are getting from these computer games, especially while they're sitting in school?
So I think the first thing to acknowledge here is that the developers of these educational games are the same great minds that are creating recreational video games, right? They are experts at the compulsion loop. They're experts at keeping you hooked. And if you haven't read the book Dopamine Nation by Anna Lembke, I highly recommend it. It is such an easy and beautiful read about dopamine. And she has she can say it way better than I can, but she has a great way of explaining the dopamine, like pain, pleasure, kind of teeter-totter, where the more that you're pressing on that pleasure end of it, then when you stop pressing on that pleasure end, she calls them little gremlins. The little gremlins have to hop on the pain side in order to stabilize, to bring you to homeostasis. And not only do they press it to get you equal, but they press you in equal and opposite amount. So you're actually going down before you come back up to homeostasis. And the more you're pressing that dopamine lever, then the more you have dopamine dysregulation in your brain. And the harder it is to find that homeostasis. And oftentimes the more painful it is when you stop pressing the lever. Okay. So there's two problems. One is just the immediate problem, right? Which is you have a child in your class, maybe you're saying, this child's overstimulated, there's some behavior, I'm going to put them on this game to quote unquote calm them down. It's not going to calm them down because the very nature of it is overstimulating and dopamine producing. And not only just like little dopamine, like dopamine is in everyday life. You get a dopamine from petting your dog, dopamine from eating a cupcake. But the difference is you might eat one cupcake, but you're not sitting at your desk with a dozen cupcakes, like just trying to not like plow through all of them.
Hmm.
And that's what that dopamine fire hose of 12 cupcakes is the same as as a video game or an
Hmm.
educational game. It's just a massive amount of dopamine. And the result of that often, which we see as parents, if you have your child on a screen and then take them off, you hear that very often. Or teachers report the same thing. They take the child off the screen, and then you see the results of that opposite, equal and opposite reaction, which is maybe they're sluggish, they're irritable, they're inattentive, they're unfocused. It's like you see the opposite side of that. So just in that moment, there's concerns with it. But I also honestly worry about bigger picture, which is like, what are we teaching? We're also ultimately creating, we have little humans that we're creating into big humans that are one day
Hmm.
going to be functional in the world. And I think all of these little moments, I call it the digital twitch, but I think from a very young age, when we have a device on the desk and you can just grab Prodigy anytime you have downtime, like, you finish your work and now you're welcome to go on Prodigy. It
Hmm.
creates a digital twitch where that split second of boredom, your immediate connection, that brain connection you've made is fill it with a device.
Hmm.
There's nothing, you're not even thinking about anything else. And because of the sheer amount of dopamine you get from that, it is very rewarding. So it trumps all else. Many parents could probably relate to this experience of if you have a child that is often on a device and then you say, like, let's play a card game. They're probably more restless or bored with that. They want it to hurry along.
Hmm.
They're just not going to be as engaged with that because we have upped like the fireworks and excitement of
Right.
life and entertainment to a place where it's in a way unsustainable into adulthood. And even as we're looking at later high school and college, we have to teach how to be attentive in boring and tedious moments.
Hmm.
So allowing students to feel comfortable with a moment of boredom or do anything else, literally, I mean, daydreaming or
Hmm.
writing in your journal. You can color, you could sit, maybe talk quietly to a friend. Maybe they are allowed to play like one of my kids has like this little black thing where they like line up multiplication numbers with little tiny wooden blocks. There's so many different ways that you could fill downtime
Hmm.
than to just reach for the device. So big picture, I worry about that.
Yeah. Well, I spoke to Richard Fried, who wrote this really amazing book called
Hmm.
Better Than Real Life that was all about how Silicon Valley very specifically uses psychologists to figure out exactly what elements to put into games and to social media to keep us hooked. And he said in his book there was a study done in the 90s with just very basic video games that we remember. They were just so basic compared to now. And they had hooked up people to sensors and whatnot. And just these really basic video games were giving kids the amount of dopamine that amphetamines give you. So
Hmm.
I can't even imagine what something today like Prodigy or like Fortnite or whatever, what kind of crazy amount of dopamine they're getting if they were getting speed like dopamine on Super Mario Brothers. So to your point, how in the world are you going to want to do flashcards or color when you're coming down from a literal high? And it's like
Hmm.
everything else in life is boring. It honestly just, the underlying thing is that it makes me sad. I don't want these kids to live a life where everything is boring. We used to think things like Heads Up, 7 Up, or just all these fun games. Like those were so fun. Or even like in terms of flashcards, I don't know if you played Around the World and you'd be kind of
Yes.
competing against each other with flashcards. I just remember thinking that was the most fun thing of the day. And it would make me so sad if that is just, oh, that's so boring. Because it's not Prodigy. So boring. We're robbing our kids of joy, basically.
We are. And really, our brains were made for a more like a scarcity, more mindset with dopamine. Like we used to have to like work for it. We'd have to like walk a long ways to like get
Hmm.
the berry that we wanted to eat. And so our brains are just not primed for this. This truly, Anna Lemke calls it a fire hose. And I think that's the most perfect descriptor of it. It is just a fire hose of dopamine in the brain. It's way too much and it's all the time.
Hmm. Yeah. So, what about, again, another side of this delivery method, paper versus screen, and like some of the research that's come out about what happens with learning when you're writing on a piece of paper with a pen versus writing on a tablet, or reading a paper book versus reading on a screen?
So the research in traditional methods, specifically reading in print and handwriting, is tremendous. I mean, we have just a tremendous amount of it out there, and it's pretty black and white. This is not an area that we can really even argue. We know without a doubt that reading in print does improve comprehension and recall, long-term memory, attention, working memory, and really quite importantly, it allows you to have a deeper knowledge of the material. So it's not like a superficial, like, I think I get that, but it's you're having a deeper knowledge, which obviously helps you to build on knowledge later on and just remember that better. Same with handwriting. It's improving memory, your recall, your conceptual understanding of complicated material. I think the fine motor skills piece gets brought up a lot, and often we talk about that in the lower grades, but that's really important for many grades, not just like kindergarten and first grade, but the fine motor skill development is kind of goes by the wayside when you're learning to just finger write letters on an iPad, or maybe you learned handwriting in kindergarten or first grade, but by second grade, you're on a device. But I would say overall, this is one area that if there was going to be a simple change that a school district would make, this is exactly where I would land on that simple change. If you could just say, let's eliminate as much reading, digital reading as we can, and do print reading, and let's do as much handwriting as we can with note taking. Those are the two most profound and impactful changes you can make. And with reading, another interesting statistic for me that's kind of concerning is children who mostly read on digital devices are 3 times less likely to enjoy reading than kids who read in print. And reading, that might sound like, oh, maybe you could take that as something like very simple, but I think there's a bigger and more profound problem with that, which is that kids who read a lot learn more. They have more knowledge about the world. They have more empathy for another person's point of view. You have more exposure to everything. It doesn't matter, like maybe that's how you learn what a stroke is, because you read about a child's grandfather who had this experience, and you can imagine what that'd be like. There's just random information that you learn when you're reading books. So we want children to want to read because it increases their knowledge base across the board.
And what seems to be happening a lot is that they're reading excerpts and not whole books. So that's a new trend that I actually spoke about with Natalie Wexler. So one thing I find is that my son absolutely loves to read. He will just pick up a random library book sitting around the house, and we'll just find him reading all the time. However, at school, they have a program called EdTech, and they are supposed to, I'm a little hazy on how this works, but there's these AR quizzes that they take, and there's also this program called EdTech where they read on the screen, and you can get read to by the EdTech program, or you can read yourself. But what he does is, since he's forced to take these comprehension tests, he admitted he reads the questions first, and then he goes back and he just picks through the text to find the answers, because it's gamified, because he wants the badges, he wants the points, he wants to be allowed to go to Friday Fun Pride Club, because if you don't have X amount of badges, you don't get to go to Friday Fun Club. And so I'm very glad that he likes reading at our house and that we've instilled a love of reading for him. But if families aren't instilling that at home, then unfortunately school is not instilling that. School is instilling, get the badges, get the points, pick through the paragraphs to find the answers, not, hey, we're all going to just read Charlotte's Web together and enjoy it for what it is. And so I feel like that is a part of what is problematic about the gamified nature of reading and being on a screen, because it's pretty hard to gamify it when it's on a piece of paper. But what about in older grades, like high schoolers and college, in terms of like taking notes and being able to remember better if they're taking them on a screen or a laptop versus by hand?
Yeah, across the board. Human brains, I think we are under this impression that our adult brain is different than the child's brain. And it is in many profound ways, but in many ways, we all learn in similar ways. So we learn the best by reading in print and handwriting throughout our entire lifetime. It's the same with I used to use the paper calendar, which I wish I could get back to, but life is too chaotic with all my kids. I need it all in one place, filtered in. But you imagine writing it down. Maybe you have a certain color you wrote it in, or you remember it on the page. Even simple things like your daily calendar, you remember better rather than opening the app in the morning and being like, oh my God, I have this appointment today. I forgot about that. It sticks in your brain. And I think many of us probably have can recall a time that you were taking a test and you're sitting there at the desk and you're imagining like, okay, it was at the top left corner of the page.
Yeah.
And I remember it was
Just
above
how
this
you
image.
picture it. Yeah.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. So the whole experience is like multidimensional when you're reading in print and when you're handwriting on paper. And all of across our ages, from young early learners all the way through adults, we do better when we're reading on print and when we're handwriting.
And I'd read about taking notes that if you've got a laptop in front of you, you're tempted to try to verbatim write down
Yes,
what the
correct.
teacher's saying.
Yeah,
But if you're
rather
doing
than
it by
synthesize.
hand,
Mhm.
yeah, there's no way that you could verbatim write it down unless, I guess, if you know shorthand. But so you have to synthesize it. You have to think, what's the most important part of that sentence she just said, and write down like 3 words. And so your brain is actually doing the job of taking in the information, synthesizing it, then write down what's the most important part. Whereas if you're typing it out to verbatim, it's probably just passing right through you pretty much.
Yes.
And so
And also just even having the laptop open in class is distracting to other students.
yeah.
So I know Harvard is starting to put limits. Some of their professors are starting to put limits on even bringing laptops into the classroom
Interesting.
because they can see that it's not only affecting that student who's taking the notes on the computer and not retaining as much as the other students, but the student next to them who's
Yeah.
trying to write by hand is distracted by the device and is not doing as well as they could be doing.
Wow, that's great. I can't even imagine. I mean, I went to college 25 years ago, and there was nobody using a laptop in class. The best distraction was that my roommate would always bring in the daily newspaper and be doing the crossword. She'd be doing the crossword, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "This is I can do both at once." But a huge problem in terms of having computers in front of kids is, I read on your Substack, 41% of teens access pornography during the school day, and nearly half do so using school-issued devices. So, I mean, there's a whole other thing about whether or not they would have their cell phone at school, but that is certainly problematic if it's a no-phone school, but they're still watching pornography on just their Chromebook. So,
yeah, exactly. I mean, so filters are necessary and filters do work, but they are not foolproof, and nobody can believe that they are foolproof. And I think we often have this idea that we like to use technology to solve technology's problems, which basically we just end up chasing our tail. And there's always going to be, it's a game of cat and mouse, and there's always a mouse that's smarter in the school, or at least has figured the workaround. And it doesn't take long for them to very rapidly disseminate that information to the other students. I will say that there is no perfect foolproof plan for technology and for protecting students from seeing inappropriate content. And the first step truly is acknowledging that. Like the school has to say, we are never going to be able to do this 100%. But I heard somebody, and I wish I could remember who said this, but they said it's like a Swiss cheese approach. And that is what I've always thought of with this. There are going to be holes in every single layer. You have to just layer enough pieces of Swiss cheese that it catches everything ideally, but it's never going to catch everything, right? And there's multiple layers to that. But first, we've got to delay access to internet until it's appropriate age-wise, until they're just old enough to understand the complications of violating school policy. The complications are the consequences on them as a human if they're putting something inappropriate out there online. We also have to be doing digital citizenship courses 2 to 3 years before kids are even on internet connected devices. But I think more than anything, along with the filters and along with the school use policies and along with digital citizenship, there has to be a culture in the school of healthy tech use that is trying to be fostered constantly, discussed, and prioritized. And what that looks like is the school saying, acknowledging the digital dilemma. We understand that these devices are going to be necessary at some point in your life, and we're going to teach you how to use them responsibly. But there are downsides, and we need to talk about the downsides and the risks so that we're all really just on the same page as this. And we're going to talk about why are we making the decision that every kid in this class is getting a biology textbook and we're not putting it on a device. Why are we doing that? We're doing that because when you're in college, this is the decision you should make. Get the book from the library if they don't have it in the bookstore. do not rely on the digital option if you have a print option available to you.
Got it.
But I
Got it.
think you have to have these multiple layers of Swiss cheese in order to protect students from what is, in a way, inevitable. And so acknowledging that it is inevitable and doing your best to prevent it through multiple sources is going to be your best bet, because they're going to get around it.
Yeah,
You
absolutely,
open a door as soon as you give them devices.
and that's the education part of it, which I think what you said is so, so, so important, that we need to, just like health class, there needs to be digital wellness class, and all these kids need to understand this whole new world that we're getting into. I mean, we always joke of like, you know, why was I learning trigonometry? I wish they had taught me how to balance my checkbook and do my taxes. I mean, obviously health class is incredibly important, but what could be more important in this day and age than teaching them how to be safe and savvy around screens? So I really hope a lot of schools start doing these types of classes just as a basic, so that kids know what they're getting into before they're getting too deep into tech. But yeah, I think you're just totally right about the Swiss cheese. You just got to do what you can, and then just know that it is flawed. And you're saying that they are going to be living in a world full of screens. They need to understand that they can choose to be a part of that world as much as they want or as little as they want. But the myth number 3 that you list is that EdTech is necessary for 21st century skills. So why is that untrue?
Well, first of all, I just want any educators listening to know that there are no research-based reasons an educator should feel compelled to use devices. First of all, there's just nothing that says that they have to, but there are harms. So 21st century skills that students really need and that employers are looking for are mostly the soft skills. And those soft skills are something that we're not really nurturing all that much. And when I say soft skills, I'm talking about critical thinking, collaboration, communication, problem solving, interpersonal skills, creativity, even like simple eye contact is something that we need to be teaching our students how to do in the real world. And the main reason for that is a student entering school today will retire likely like in the 2080s, like 2085-ish. We have no idea what kinds of digital tools we need to be teaching a student who's going to like make it through their entire career, and they're going to be on top of their like tech game to the bitter end. We just have no idea. And so what we do need to teach them is like, how are we going to how are we going to help build your brain so that you can pivot and you can figure it out no matter what, that you can learn that app on its own if you need to, because that takes attention and critical thinking and problem solving and all these other skills that we kind of wash over, thinking that what we really need to do is just, you know, get the math score or something. But there's a whole host of other skills that I think are being unacknowledged and that are far more important to a student today, to the longevity of their career, than just teaching them how to highlight on a Kindle.
Yeah. Well, and then also there's a difference between what you call transformative technology and just constant barrage of screens. So let's say if we were to go back to the computer lab model of like, you have computer class once a week or twice a week or whatever, and that's where you learn some of these tech skills, and you don't have to have a screen in front of you all the rest of the day, all the rest of the hours. What are some of those like transformative technology skills?
Emily Churkin does a great job of framing this. She says there's a difference between tech ed and ed tech, and that's exactly the simplest way to sum it up. Ed tech is we don't need to use technology to teach children every subject. But tech ed, absolutely. We do need to teach students how to use technology. And we define transformative as something that produces a unique outcome or develops a high-level skill. So that's almost, I mean, you could see that as almost its own individual class. So like in an entrepreneurial class, you could teach them website development. Maybe in a math or accounting class, you're teaching Excel spreadsheets. There could be an entire class devoted to robotics. There are really fascinating ways that you can use technology that are legitimately high-level skills that could change the trajectory of somebody's career path, or maybe open up an interest that they weren't aware of. And some of these things are just important for really anybody to know, whether you're college bound or not, but just looking at, you know, checking multiple sources online, looking for misinformation. There are a lot of basic tech ed classes or courses work that we could do that is vitally important. And I would hate to see schools get rid of that, which I don't think would happen. But, I would hate to see,
Yeah.
that's the piece that I would want held and
Yeah.
prioritized.
So
And
really thinking, is this something that needs technology? Of course, if you're going to program a robot that you made, it needs to be done on software. It needs to be done on a screen. If you're learning, like you said, if you're learning how to do Canva and do some digital art and you're learning how, there's so many things.
How to edit a video and make a documentary, like any of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But like, you don't need to read on a screen. You don't need to do your math on a screen. Maybe teachers and administrators need to step back and say, like, is this absolutely necessary for this particular activity? And sometimes yes, and sometimes it's great. Like you're saying, they could make up their own music video and edit it. That sounds really fun and sounds like something they could learn a lot from. But do they really need to be reading on a screen? No, there's something else that's existed for thousands of years that was working just fine.
Exactly. I think the decision tree is there. You look and you say, is there a traditional method? And is that traditional method equal to or more effective than the other method? And if it's equal to or more effective, then it has to be selected. And instead, we've kind of gotten to this place where it's like, if you can use the screen, use the screen. And that's not the decision tree that we should be in.
Yeah. A lot of schools have handed over tech and they've just told their teachers, use it as much as possible. And so it's almost like we have to get to the opposite, where it's like, yes, you have this tech and use it as little as possible. Use it when it's truly beneficial, but don't just use it for the sake of using it because it cost our PTA a ton of money and we want to just prove that we're using it.
Exactly. In my piece, I liken it to paint. It's like paint is probably pretty vital for a few classes, like painting class, but it's not necessary for every single class. And it would probably actually get in the way in many classes.
Yeah.
So it's the same idea. If this is really just this tool, then the tool is not going to be the tool we need for everything. There's no tool out there that we use for everything.
Yeah.
So we have to say, like, is this the tool we absolutely need for this? And while we're doing that, is this developmentally appropriate? Are we teaching first graders how to do robotics for an hour and a half on a software that's internet connected? But 11th graders, sure. And then what are the appropriate time limits in place? Is this something that we're now doing, like, is it 6 hours of technology a day? Are we talking 90 minutes a day when we're in, high school? There's multiple levels here that you have to look at.
I'm curious, you say that your own kids don't attend the top-rated school that's across the street from your house. And is that because of the way that school uses technology?
Yeah, it is. Exclusively because of that reason. It is.
So you just found that they were using, laptops and just in every grade all the time?
Yes, I try not to get into my personal experience there too much, but there was the year that I really started doing that research. I was looking at sending my oldest. I have 4 children, and my oldest is 11, so he was entering kindergarten in 2019. So in 2018, I just started to hear rumblings in my neighborhood about how they were using devices, and it's the same rumblings probably most of your listeners hear. Just like inappropriate content, the device is being used too much, parents not really knowing what was going on. And so I did really just a deep dive. I talked to so many parents. And my business partner at that time we had families kind of just talk to us about their experiences on there, what the screen time looked like. I talked with administration, toured and observed, met with the superintendent, just went all the way up. And I just found by the end of that year, it was not going to be a good fit for my family.
And so you've been able to find a different type of school that uses tech minimally?
I have found, yes. So 3 of my children attend one particular type of school, and another one of my children is educated differently than that. And interestingly, though, my business partner has 2 children, and she sends her children to a different school altogether. And we read the same research and do the same work. So I think the type of school or what educational decision we've made is not really, I don't think that shows the answers. Where the answers really are is how does your school, what kind of philosophy does your school have on technology, and how are they implementing it? How are they working with parents? How are they protecting students? How are they acknowledging that digital dilemma every step of the way?
Well, so I actually found you because I was going to the director of our school and just asking if they would consider doing a phone-free school and just starting conversations about how much tech is used in the classroom and could we lean back from that. And so I found everyschool.org, and I actually gave the director a list of your 10 best practices because I just love them. And number 1 is embrace printed texts. So we've discussed that. Number 2, embrace handwriting. Number 3, embrace transformative technology, which we just talked about, which is, robotics or web design or video editing. Number 4, limit gamified apps. Number 5, limit digital worksheets. Use traditional methods instead. Number 6, don't use screen time for behavior management. So what does that look like? Could you explain that part a little bit more? Because we've already kind of gone over the first 5.
Sure. So I touched on it a little bit before. Often when I hear tech being used for behavior management, what I usually hear is the child that might be a little bit more spirited or have some energy, they give that child a device to kind of go settle down, head over to that reading corner and get on your Epic app or play Prodigy or do what you need to do to quote unquote calm down. But as we've already discussed, probably, at length earlier in the podcast, like there are profound effects from that, primarily from the amount of dopamine they're receiving. It's really going to dysregulate their dopamine even more, hyperstimulate them, and you're going to end up with more behavior problems. It is far better to manage behavior through a calming technique. Like you're going to go outside and have extra recess as a class today because the whole class is hyped up. We're not going to just like sit on the devices because everyone's spinning out of control. Or maybe a small group of students is going to go with a paraprofessional out for a walk. Teachers are amazingly creative, far more creative than I am. So I know that they've got a ton of tricks up their sleeves for managing this. The main way I would say to not manage behavior is using a device. It's just going to make problems worse.
Yeah. And that was one thing I talked about with the director of my kids' school is that I was noticing that because we live in Colorado, and so there are some days that are very cold and snowy. And so there's a certain threshold of temperature when they have indoor recess. And I would ask the kids, what did you do for indoor recess? And almost every single time they said free choice on the Chromebook. And so I just was asking, could we possibly, use the Chromebook for lessons, but could indoor recess perhaps be reading time, running around time, run through the halls?
Board games.
I get it. It's
just board games in the classroom.
Yeah, it's not easy to be a teacher at all. And I just give it up to all the teachers out there because it is probably the hardest job in the world and the most important one. And I know they need a break. But I think, like you're saying, let's do some board games. Let's do some just whatever type of fun in-person games for not only recess, but also as a reward. I'm wondering, a lot of times I find out that, the Friday Fun Club was a movie. It was free choice on your Chromebook. It was Prodigy. So I think a lot of teachers just have gotten in a habit through no fault of their own because the technology is available and it's easy. And sometimes the administration has actually been pushing it, like I've said, where they said, we just bought some brand new Promethean screens, so we might as well use them. So this would be my ask of teachers is to say, just think for a split second, do I really need to use the screen, or could I do something in real life and try as much as possible to just lean on the real life stuff and keep the screens for the stuff that really needs screens. But and brain breaks, I guess, too. A lot of times there's YouTube videos where they jump around to the YouTube video. I just feel like we could jump around without the video. But, and I get it, I'm not in there. I'm not leading the 30 second graders, but just as for people to just keep it in mind, it's just an option.
And, these kids get such a small recess break anyway. They really do need a big out breath in that moment. They need to just move. And I get that the weather can be tough in some schools, and all schools have different levels. My school is the kind of school where there's no bad weather, just bad gear. So we are outside unless there's lightning. There's no time we're not outside ever. But other schools, it's just a different threshold for that. But what we have to remember is developmentally, what does the child need in that moment? And the child needs a big out breath. They need to move their body. They need to talk to peers. They need to have those little like games, like let the creative juices go, all the way through high school. They need time to just sit and decompress with a friend, make eye contact, try to bring those loneliness rates down. There's a ton of benefit from those breaks. And we impede on that ability as soon as we give them the device as an option, because most of the time they're going to choose the device.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to myself about I have friends that I've had since kindergarten and all the inside jokes we have. And that was because we were whispering in class. We were sending notes to each other in class. We were talking during passing periods. And if we were constantly on a screen, we wouldn't have even bothered to make those jokes. And so,
or the connections.
Number 7 says, don't use social media as a teaching or communication tool. Could you explain that a little more?
Yeah, I think there's this understandable idea that we were going to meet kids where they're at and they're on devices and on social media, so go online. But unfortunately, when schools, clubs, coaches, after school, whatever, when they use social media to communicate, first of all, it forces the hands of parents. So there are many parents out there who would like to delay social media. Maybe their goal is high school, maybe it's 16, maybe it's 18. But no matter what it is, they're being undermined when you start to get yourself in a situation where you just don't have you feel like you don't have another option, that this is the way that they're receiving this information. It also, it normalizes. It makes it seem like every child must have this because this is the way we communicate. And I think that schools would do a tremendous service to families and communities if they framed it the other way. It is normal for our 15-year-olds to not have social media, so we're not going to communicate with them through social media. If they normalize the flip side of that, then people rise to that expectation rather than the other direction. And having that normalization of social media makes it seem like it's exciting and interesting, something I have to have, something I'm missing out on, which I think we need to move away from. The data on social media is pretty damning, honestly, right? There's not a lot of debate out there anymore that too much social media use, and really even small amounts of social media use, can be quite damaging, especially to certain populations. So we need to make the norm be our kids are not on social media.
Yeah.
And how are we going to communicate with them?
So just if you're telling everybody what time soccer practice is, just do it in an old-fashioned way, because if you say that the schedule is going to be on Facebook, that's just promoting that all of your 9th and 10th, all those kids should be on Facebook to find out the schedule. So number 8 is Go Phone Free. And so there is a subsidiary of everyschool.org called the Phone Free Schools Project. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. If you want your district to go phone free, we've tried to take some of the challenging aspects out of that big ask. And what we do is you can encourage other parents in your district to fill out that form. Once we hit 40 families in your community that have signed the form, then we will send information to your school board and to your administrators, telling them both that there is a growing movement in your community. Parents want this. And we also give them initial resources. What would this look like? How could you start it on your own? I think a lot of people want this. We know this. Many parents want this. But the idea, you want to work in collaboration with your school. You don't want to come in seeming like the adversary. So this is a gentler way to say, look, this is something we would really like, and there are 40 of us or more, and we're hoping to make some progress in this area, and have somebody else send that email and somebody else send the resources while still showing your strength in numbers.
Okay, so I didn't even realize that. So if I want a phone-free school, I sign up on your website, and then you're saying once there's like a critical mass, you guys alert the administration of our school?
Yes.
There's X amount of people that want a phone-free school. Oh, that's really cool. So it's kind of similar to Wait Until 8th in some ways.
Yeah, no way. It's a similar idea. Yeah. But,
okay. Oh, that's cool. I didn't even realize that. That's really neat. And then let's see, number 9 is protect early learners from too much screen time. So that's basically just delaying these devices, right? Don't give iPads to kindergartners.
Correct. I mean, really, through elementary school, I say the early learners because they're, I think, the most vulnerable. But really, elementary school, we don't need devices in elementary school. It's certainly not internet connected devices in elementary school.
Yeah. And then number 10 is create a district plan. And so your tech triangle could be very, very helpful if a district is trying to figure out what their plan is. And they could even go through device by device, app by app, and just use that triangle to figure out if it's a worthwhile technology for them to have. I think a lot of the problem is that the teachers are not given enough guidance. They're just told, yeah, use it as much as possible. And so what do you think would help teachers to implement healthy tech?
I think a lot of that, the root of all of that is that professional development. App developers and platforms and big tech offer a tremendous amount of professional development, often for free. And then you only hear one side of this, how tech can only help. And you see their industry inflated data, and you're very easily sold. I mean, you see these videos, and it's the most beautiful, like, pieces of art that you think, and that you end the video and you think, oh, I want my child to experience gravity through the iPhone, whatever. It's so compelling. The sales pitch is perfect. The opposite, though, it does not happen. There's not a lot of money in coming in saying, like, we need more eye contact in classes. We need face-to-face connection. We need print books. Like, it's not like the national libraries are coming in and saying, like, have this tremendous amount of money to bring in the professional development. So the schools have to be really intentional. It's the same thing we teach our students. Be really intentional about what you're doing online, right? Same idea in a bigger picture. Do not just look at one source. So I'm asking the schools, do not just look at one source. Yes, you absolutely need professional development on technology if you have technology in your school, but you also need professional development on child development, on the harms of technology, on digital wellness, on social emotional learning, disconnected from technology. It has to be equal. And I don't think it is from what I generally hear. Maybe there are some school districts who are doing that, but that's not generally who we hear from.
So it is, remember, like, consider the source. If the person who's selling you the technology is telling you how wonderful it is, just remember that's their job. Of course, they're going to tell you how wonderful it is. And again, sometimes it is wonderful. It's really, really cool, and it's really useful for an occasional time during the school day for a specific project. And
sometimes it's really, really cool and it seems enticing and engaging, but it's actually not effective and there is a harm there. And I think using that critical thinking piece of that is enticing, that is intriguing, that would be cool, but what am I losing? Like, if I were to implement this into my classroom, is there a loss? And what would that loss be? And does that loss matter? Because oftentimes you will find that no matter how cool the app is or the program is, there is a loss underlying all of that. And that could be as simple as just human connection. But human connection, especially today, looking at the data we see on mental health, human connection is vital. And that starts at a young age.
Now, like I said, my kids do go to a school that has a lot of tech, and I'm working as much as I can to reduce that. But if we wanted our kids to opt out, what would that look like? Do you have any suggestions for us?
That's tricky because every school is going to respond differently to that. I've heard from schools who are accommodating and willing to do that, and other schools that are not. They say, I wouldn't be able to educate your child in the same way if we weren't using the device. So, but I will say, I encourage you to be the change you want to see. I encourage you to say, I will help provide, I will check out the print books from the library and I will send them in with my child, or whatever that, I will have them handwrite it at home and I will take a picture of it and then upload it to your app or whatever, rather than them doing the digital worksheet, whatever that is. I mean, it's going to take a little more legwork for many parents who care about this issue, but ultimately I think you have to take peace in knowing you are a seed of change. And the more parents who say, this is what I'd like to do, the school eventually will accommodate and they'll step back to using traditional methods. And we're already actually seeing that this ball is rolling. I think at one point it was innovative and you were ahead of the curve if you were one of the schools that were on a one-to-one iPad program. But I think we're now starting to see that turn the other way, where that is like, you've kind of lost your way if that's the priority. What schools that are truly innovative now are saying is there is wonderful ways to use technology, and we're going to prioritize that. But above all else, we are going to make sure that our children are getting soft skill development, face-to-face connection, and we are developing them as humans.
And just remembering that we're all in this together, and we all thought this was amazing at first, too. I mean,
exactly.
We saw it all come in. I mean, it is amazing what computers can do. And administrators, they're there because they love kids. I mean, teachers
same
are
with
there
the
because
teachers.
they love kids. And so everybody does want what's best for the kids. We all just got a little bit of stars in our eyes when all this tech first came in because it really seemed so cool. And now we're just realizing, okay, let's pare it back. And we see the data now, we see the research, we see what it's doing to kids. And so, I would tell people to just go in real easy. You don't need to burn the house down. Remember that these people care about your kids. They just need the information. That's why I love your website, because it has the information that we need. They just need the research. They just need the hard facts, and then they can make the right choice once they've got the facts. But
they need the hard facts, and they need to hear that parents get it. They are wanting the same change. But you're right. It's why I named the piece "The False Promise of a Device-Based Education." We were all sold the same promise. And parents pushed for these one-to-one devices to be in schools. It wasn't just the school unilaterally decided this. This was a critical mass of people saying, we want this. And now people are saying, wait a second, this is actually not what I thought it was going to be. And that's the reality. This was a promise that we were sold that really has not come to fruition.
Well, and also, I'm 46 years old. When I was a kid, you really did have to actually learn stuff like coding and all that to be able to really effectively use computers. There was actually a pretty big amount of knowledge that you had to have. And I think we were all thinking, for our kids to be successful in tech, there's X, Y, and Z that they're going to have to learn. The catch is tech has changed so much, and it's so user-friendly, and it's so easy now, and especially with AI is just going to do so much for us that there's not really that much tech knowledge that the average person is going to need. Like you said, they're really just going to need how to learn, or they're just going to have to know how to pivot, how to change, how to innovate, how to work with others, how to be resilient. And they're not going to learn all that stuff from the computer. So, I think
a lot of base knowledge, because base knowledge is what builds on deeper knowledge, right? To become an expert in your field, to know whether AI is feeding you something that's true or not, you have to have a tremendous amount of knowledge to even have context for that.
Right.
So while
Absolutely.
AI is, the debt on AI is it's really, it really does help people who are already high level in their field do menial tasks that they want off their plate. But it does impair learning when you're using it to learn. When you're at that stage before you've really gained mastery, it impedes your learning.
Yeah.
So we have
absolutely.
to be very careful. That too, that's another tech education. This is a great tool. This is how you use it. And this is when you use it.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Well, in Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation, he has these 4 norms that he sets forth. And the 4th norm is that kids should have more independence, more free play, and more responsibility. And so the last question I love to ask people is, what is a memory you could share from your childhood or from being a teen when you got true independence and you were allowed to do something without your folks or without adults around?
My parents were wonderful in allowing me a tremendous amount of independence, and it made me feel very confident and sure that I could manage myself in the world, which is a skill that I think, a quality that we are robbing our children of when we don't give them a tremendous amount of independence. So I think for me, I just had free range of our neighborhood. I'd be on my bike, just riding anywhere and everywhere, being in the creeks and in the woods and in the other neighborhoods, up and down the streets. We'd make up games on the spot, just that not feeling like anyone was breathing down my neck or watching me or cameras were recording me.
Yeah.
Just like living your best life completely free of all of that.
How old do you think you were when they first started letting you do that?
Well, it's funny because my earliest memories are of doing that. So I had to be, really, you're developing memories around like 9-ish. So I had to be probably even younger than that. I lived in a safe neighborhood. It was fine. But I do the same thing for my kids. I think some people are probably astounded at the amount of freedom they have. But I really believe that unless you are teaching strength and ability and capability, then if you're not doing that, then you're doing the opposite. So I work very hard to let my children know that they are capable and they can get through anything. And there's nothing that's going to be too hard, and they'll figure it out. They fall on their bike, they'll figure out how to get back home,
Yep. Very good. Thank you so very much, Amy. And thank you guys for what you are doing. It really is an amazing resource if you're trying to change things in your school. So what are the main websites people can go to learn more?
The main website is everyschool.org. That's our main
Okay.
website with the EdTech triangle, with the research. We have the EdTech report, which is just all of the research that we use to support the EdTech triangle. It's also our Parents of Every School sign-up page where you can sign up to lead a small group of parents in your neighborhood and or your community, ideally in your school. We like to use the school as a hub with different topics every month. And then phonefreeschools.org is our website if you want to do that petition to your school.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Cynthia.
Thank you for listening to Screen Less, Play More podcast. If you like what you hear, please tell your friends and please rate and review us on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, wherever you listen. That really helps other people find us and helps us get the word out. A special thanks to WJD, who does all of our IT, and Neil Penninger, who composed our theme music. Please also check out screenlessplaymore.com for research about kids and tech, some ideas on getting kids outside playing and away from screens, book recommendations, and so much more.